In 5th place, we have the Pupic. They're a creature that lives along the Arctic shorelines near ice floes and are said to steal younglings that wander too close to the water. So this myth is believed to serve the purpose of protecting younglings from a dangerous environment, keeping them from wandering too close to the ice. So let's start this off with how they appear, shall we? Also known as the Pupic, it is often described as having green, slimy skin, long hair, and long fingernails. Their hands are webbed like an aquatic creature, along with scales and fins, and they tend to wear an enigmatic, which I believe is an Inuit parka mostly worn by women. Some versions of the legend say that their parkas are made of eider duck feathers and are used to carry kidnapped younglings. It is said to have 2 flippers, and one is able to emit a shrill sound that paralyzes its victims. They also have the ability to alter their appearance through a technique known as pilutitaminik. I tried. While some interpretations include the pronoun he, this creature is predominantly described in a feminine manner. Now, speaking of her looks, it is believed that she uses the abducted to maintain her long, flowing hair. Well then, add that to the latest trends of growing hair. Look, I've talked about weird beauty secrets from history before, and people will truly try anything to keep their hair long and their skin clear. Accounts vary as to, what actually happens to those who are taken. Some say the victim is, simply devoured, while others say that they are held in a stasis-like state to fuel the youth. You know what, I think I'd prefer to be devoured instantly and get it over with, but let me know in the comments what you'd prefer. Moving on, I suppose. One strategy they use for hunting is to emit an ethereal hum that will draw victims closer to the water so they can be pulled in. But, don't worry, they can be defeated. They're not some ethereal being without any kind of vulnerabilities. This creature can be outsmarted by its targets, so clever hunters would call out to it and ask it to change shape for them, usually into something like a seal or a whale, so they could, kill it and bring home a valuable catch. Oh, but our tale is not over yet. Please, have we met? Is anything ever that simple? There are tales of younglings willingly being given to this creature as a sacrifice. One such tale is about a grandmother and her grandson who were struggling without food, so the grandmother called upon this creature to come and take him away, as she was not able to feed him and he would be, better off. So once the tribe was able to successfully hunt again, a young couple took it upon themselves to retrieve the lost boy and were able to track him down, tethered to a piece of seaweed by this creature so he could not escape her. However, they were not able to retrieve him because she would drag him back under the waves whenever the would-be want-to helpers got too close. They stealthily hid nearby all night long though, and cut him loose once the sun rose. So this tale has different variations. Some version have the grandmother giving the child to the creature as a punishment, or this child became a greater hunter after being rescued. Long story short, don't play close to the edge of the water alone, or that might be the end of you. Honestly, even as an adult, that's still something I want to observe. No drowning for me, thanks. In 4th place, we have a ghost ship. So the cargo ship Octavius met its demise in 1761 after leaving China and setting sail for Britain via the Northwest Passage. So at that time, no ship had ever successfully navigated the Northwest Passage, and the Octavius disappeared, so it's no exception to that rule. A whaling ship discovered the damaged remains of Octavius on October 11th of 1775 and boarded it to look for, survivors and cargo. When the men ventured into the below-deck quarters, they found the ship's captain frozen at his desk, partway through filling out the ship's log, and the rest of the crew were similarly encased in ice throughout their rooms. The whalers snatched up the ship log and fled the Octavius, leaving behind everything, including the first and last entries, which were stuck to the captain's frozen desk. The log revealed that the Arctic temperatures and ice captured the Octavius about 250 miles from Barrow, where all those aboard perished on November 11th of 1762. But the whalers, however, found the boat near Greenland, which meant it somehow made its way through the Northwest Passage, even with its crew frozen solid. Now look, while Frozen might not be my favorite Disney movie ever, did anyone check in with Elsa or any of her ancestors? This just seems like a magical accident that could easily be undone.
Number 3. The Terra Nova Ghosts. Back in the 19th century, everyone wanted to be that first crew to be able to get to the South Pole. The North Pole, we had that all figured out. We know all about Kris Kringle, but the South Pole was a land of opportunity and possibility. I guess we didn't know yet, it was mostly just snow and ice and not much else. One Robert Falcon Scott, and wow, Falcon is a good middle name, was determined to be that first explorer to break boundaries. And in 1911, Robert Falcon Scott took a crew out on an expedition called the Terra Nova Expedition. The ship would make landfall a little later that year on the Ross Dependency, a nice little chunk of the frozen wasteland south of New Zealand. He and his team set up camp on the Great Ice Barrier, and while some crew would stay behind to look after the camp, find food and shelter, unloading slaves sled dogs, ponies, and they built a hut with quilted insulation, while everybody else would venture forward to go towards that South Pole. However, things would not go quite as they had planned. You see, a rival explorer had already got to the South Pole about a month before Scott made it. One Roald Edmondson had already planted a black flag in the ice. Scott's crew were completely defeated and crestfallen, months and months of freezing labor, and they had absolutely nothing to show for it. History doesn't care about the second guy to get to the South Pole. A defeated Scott and the 4 men he took past the hut began a journey backwards, but it would prove treacherous. The men were already weak in spirits and started to fall to the elements. One by one, frostbite, gangrene, and starvation would take them. Scott would record one last journal entry in 1912. It's a bit harrowing, to be honest. Take a listen to this. Every day we have been ready to start for our depot 11 miles away, but outside the door of the tent it remains a scene of whirling drift. I do not think we can hope for any better things now. We shall stick it out to the end, but we are getting weaker of course, and the end cannot be far. It seems a pity, but I do not think I can write any more. Signed, R. Scott. Last entry. And for God's sakes, look after our people. Like the rest of his crew, Scott would ultimately be taken by the Antarctic. Scott's hut still stands in the Antarctic to this day, and those who've been say they feel the unease standing there, as if there's something wrong in the air. And some have even gone so far as to say they felt like they could hear the voices, chattering teeth, and suffering of the men still freezing away from the cold all these years later. Number 2. Outpost 31. Working at a research station in Antarctica can't be easy. First of all, you gotta deal with the frozen conditions, being locked up with a bunch of other people for months at a time, isolated from the rest of the world, and being on one would be haunting enough without the threat of your coworkers going mad and attacking you. Take a listen to the story of Outpost 31, a now abandoned American research station where its entire crew went missing, presumed dead, and to date, no one really knows what happened. Outpost 31 was a research station located in, well, you guessed it, Antarctica, harboring 11 researchers, including one helicopter pilot, who were stationed there for the year of 1982. It was a fairly routine assignment, and all of the men involved were seasoned and no stranger to the conditions. A similar outpost maintained by a Norwegian research crew was the only sign of life nearby, which was also abandoned under similar circumstances. The only survivor seeming to be a wandering sled dog from the Norwegian station, which eventually made its way to Outpost 31 and was taken in by one Richard Clark, who was in charge of handling the sled dogs at Outpost 31. There isn't a whole lot of information available outside of a few diaries kept on computers from some of the researchers, but it was believed among the men that the dog they had brought in had been carrying some sort of foreign pathogen, some thing that had infected the men and their water and food supply, as shortly after this, there were reports of the men acting aggressive to each other, paranoid, distrusting, violent, and delusional. A log from the lead physician on the station showed that he had become so paranoid that this new novel virus they had let in would destroy the world if it breached containment, and the men had imposed themselves into a quarantine in an attempt to contain it, and eventually succumbed to madness. June 25th, 1982 was the last time anyone made any contact with Outpost 31. An SOS beacon was sent out, but when the rescue had arrived, they were shocked to discover smoldering remnants of the station. The outpost had been badly demolished, burnt, and several of the men had been found dead in brutal conditions, torn apart by wounds that didn't look like anything a human could have done. Some bodies were recovered, but concerningly, a majority of them had been completely lost with no signs whatsoever what had happened to them. But perhaps most bizarrely was the bodies found of the helicopter pilot and the chief mechanic, which were both found slumped over, frozen over, holding a bottle between them, suggesting the two men had accepted their fate and just waited for it to come. Number 1. The Ross Station Crash. Now this might be hard to imagine since we tend to exclusively think of Antarctica as a barren wasteland inhabited exclusively by penguins, but at one point in time it was actually a fairly popular destination for tourists to check out. Tourists would buy tickets for a day trip flight from New Zealand, would get treated to a delightful view of the barren frozen wasteland inhabited exclusively by penguins. It is kind of that. It was an exciting opportunity for people to get to see something that was previously thought unreachable. However, flights over Antarctica were not easy. The weather proves challenging, and visibility is very difficult, especially if there's any inclement weather. As well, because of the landscape, it can be very difficult for pilots to navigate with landmarks. Well, one such flight would suffer from all of these problems. It was 1979, and a flight carrying 257 passengers would be flying over Antarctica on a routine trip. Now, there were some issues. The crew staff in this particular flight were very inexperienced, and none of the pilots had ever flown along this flight path before. As well, data in the flight log was wrong. suggesting that there'd be okay visibility, but the day was plagued by low visibility. This, combined with the inexperienced pilots, made for a tragic combination, as the plane would crash into the side of Mount Erebus at 300 miles per hour, instantaneously ending the lives of every single person on the plane, all 257 of them. The remains of the passengers were taken to McMurdo Station, another American research station where they were cremated. Years onwards, researchers stationed at McMurdo have reported that they've heard strange things. Listen to this one report. As soon as I'd entered, I felt something was weird. I took a couple steps and the hair on top of my head stood on end. Footsteps upstairs where there shouldn't have been. Undeniably, there were footsteps above me. A slow cadence of footsteps. I froze up. Whew. Sends a chill down your spine, doesn't it? I should have been making spine chill puns this whole video.
Coming in at 5, Nazi base. This point is half proven and is reliant on theory as well as historical knowledge, dating back over 70 years ago. The theory goes that Germans built an underground station in Antarctica, the same station that supposedly housed Hitler after he didn't commit suicide, and instead fled north. These rumors are absurd, we know that, but there may be some truth to the madness. It is fact that Germans really were exploring Antarctica and did build a hidden base not far from the North Pole. Now, the base didn't last long and was abandoned 70 years ago by the Nazis after they were poisoned by the meat of a polar bear. In at 4, bacteria. Now, this one is huge. Underneath the ice of Antarctica, scientists have found microbes and bacteria hiding right under the ice. The samples they took date back 420,000 years, which is insane. Researchers aren't sure if it is a functional ecosystem or, I quote, disorganized hubs of life. One major question people have though is, are these bacteria dangerous? They've been frozen in time for decades. Will the acceleration of global warming and melting ice caps be opening up a Pandora's box for the world? Probably not, but never say never.
In third place, we have a woman who disappeared for a couple of days. So shamans in Inuit culture speak of 8 physical worlds that exist on the edge of their own reality. And sadly, try as I might, I could not pronounce any of them, and I don't want to butcher them. This tale hails from an unnamed elder who, as a young woman, mistakenly fell into one of these alternate planes for 3 days. At the age of this many, she was playing with her father outside when suddenly the world seemed to shift and change around her, and looked, somehow different, combined in tall grass and a strange dreamlike feeling. And after spending about, 20 to 30 minutes examining and exploring this world, this young girl decided to clamp her teeth on her hand to awaken herself, because I guess pinching herself didn't work. So she bit herself so hard that the redness poured down her hand, creating a scar that exists to this day, but the world she knew slowly shifted back into focus. Upon finding her father searching for her, she found out that the half an hour she experienced was 3 days in our world. I see where Alice in Wonderland got the inspiration. In second place, we have the Phantom driving a dog sled. Now, I know I'm not the only one who thought of the opera when I said Phantom, but no relation here. Formerly known as the Phantom Trapper, a specter cursed to drive a team of 14 pure white huskies across the barren landscapes of winter for all eternity. So visually he appears dressed from head to toe in furs and skin. And legend has it that in life he sold toxic alcohol to the indigenous population and violated many women before meeting his end from natural causes. So since the trapper evaded legal retribution during his life, and he never paid for his acts or asked for forgiveness, and that lack of earthly punishment prompted his unending mission to assist those lost in the snow and guide them to safety. Now, depending on who tells the tale, there's 2 different versions of the legend. The first is that trapping never made this man the kind of money he wanted, so he ended up setting an illegal still up in the tall spruces. This well was a foul but effective alcohol made from pine cones, sugar, and yeast, and he called it Smokes, earning him the nickname of Smoker. So the other version of the tale is that he actually brought back very fine, valuable furs whenever he returned from, his hunt, which was kind of fortunate since in this version he was a horrible woman-attacking waste of oxygen. The money he and his skins brought into the town was the only thing that would convince the townspeople to put up with him for a short time. But, eventually his drunken side would become too much and he would wear it as welcome and get kicked out of town until the next time he had a load of furs. Gotta be useful. Now, he still makes and sells smoke in this version, but it's more of like a side quest instead of his main profession. Like I mentioned earlier, in some versions of this, he continued selling smoke even though he was well aware that it was poisonous. Eventually the Mounties found his still, smashed his kegs, and hauled him off to jail for about a year. After being released, he went around begging or stealing every white husky he could in the area, building a new team of dogs, and then made himself a suit exclusively of white animal skins, and after restarting his distilling business, painted his kegs white as well. Now, decked all in white, he began selling his contraband booze once again, and his new white camouflage outfit made it impossible to track him for long in the snow. So there's several variations on how Smoker met his end. Some say he harassed the wrong innkeeper's wife and got kaboomed down by her husband, while others say he got lost while out in the wilderness or caught in a vicious storm. Eventually, no matter what, his body was found and buried, but he would not find peace in the grave. Legend tells that even today, the howl of the wind is sometimes joined by the sound of a dog team running through the night. Some hear them passing by in the snow, while others have heard their traces slapping outside the outside of their cabin. Occasionally, a person might catch a glimpse of an all-white dog team being driven by a figure in white furs, but they never leave tracks in the snow or stop on their eternal run. And in first place, we have Sedna. So Sedna is the goddess of the sea and marine animals in Inuit mythology, also known as the mother of the sea or mistress of the sea. She has a bundle of other names, but once again, while I tried learning how to pronounce them for today, I would have butchered them beyond belief, and I don't want to disrespect this tale in any way, especially not like that. So the story of Sedna, which is a creation myth, describes how she came to rule over Adlivun, the Inuit underworld. Similar to the last legend on our list, more than one version of the Sedna legend exists. Some legends have her as the daughter of a goddess, while others only mention her father. In one legend, Sedna is a giant, the daughter of the creator god Anguta, with a great hunger that causes her to attack her parents. Angered, Anguta takes her out to sea and throws her over the side of his kayak. As she clings to the sides, he chops off her fingers and she sinks to the underworld, becoming the ruler of the monsters of the deep. Her huge fingers become the seals, walruses, and whales hunted by the Inuit people. In another version of the legend, she is dissatisfied with men found for her by her father and decides to marry a dog. And her father is so angry at this that he throws her into the sea, and when she tries to climb back into the boat, he cuts off her fingers. Her fingers become the first seals and she becomes a mighty sea goddess. When she is angered, the shaman travels to wash and comb her hair for her, after which she is placated and releases the animals to the hunters. In other versions, she is unable to comb her hair because she lacks fingers, so once again, a shaman must brush it for her. In the Netsilik region, the story states that Nuliayuk was a mistreated orphan. One day the people tried to get rid of her by, attempting to drown her by chopping off her fingertips, which transformed into seals and walruses. Eventually, she marries a sculpin and lives in the sea, controlling all sea mammals. Other versions of the legend depict Sedna as a beautiful maiden who rejects marriage proposals from the hunters of her village. And when an unknown hunter appears, her father agrees to give her to him as a wife in return for fish. Sedna's father gives her a sleeping potion and gives her to the hunter, who takes her to a large nest on a cliff, revealing his true form, a giant bird spirit. Her father attempts to rescue her when he realizes the truth, but the bird spirit becomes angry, causing a great storm, and her father panics and throws her into the raging sea. Attempting to cling to the kayak, her hands freeze and her fingers fall off, becoming the creatures of the sea. She falls to the bottom of the sea and grows a fishtail. Sedna is kidnapped or deceived by a different bird creature in yet another version. Her father then leaves in his kayak to rescue her from the floating ice island where she is imprisoned while the bird creature is away, but he gets kinda ticked off by her disappearance and calls to a spirit of the sea to help him, and said spirit locates the kayak with the two humans aboard and creates huge waves to kill them. Her father throws her overboard, to try and appease the angry god, and once again, she clings to the kayak, but her father grabs a little axe and chops 3 of her fingers off before striking her on the head, and they each become a different species of seal. The stroke to her head sends Sedna to the ocean floor, where she resides, commanding the animals of the sea. In one Baffin Island tradition, she was in a kayak with her family when a storm started, and her parents thought, she was to blame, so they threw her into the sea. How'd you know? She clung to the kayak, but we cut the fingers off. The tips, then the knuckle, then the other knuckle. Her disembodied fingers turned into sea creatures and she had control over them. Between all the versions, we can see how the origins of how, seals, walruses, and whales came to be. If humans angered her, she could stop the animals from coming to their hunting sites, thus causing famine. She is generally considered a vengeful goddess, and hunters must placate and pray to her to release the sea animals from the ocean depths for their hunt. Some folks have thrown worn-out harpoon heads, broken stabby elements, and morsels of meat and bone into the sea as offerings. Do I kind of feel like a broken record after all of that? Sure, but I wanted to make sure I covered as many variations of the legend as I could to be respectful. Also, I kind of fear this goddess now, and I didn't want to risk offending her or her leagues of creatures in any form.
Number 5 on this list is the C124 Crash. To be exact, the incident is typically referred to as the 1952 Mount Gannett C124 crash. It was the tragic accident of a Douglas C124 Globemaster military transport airplane. This airplane was flying over Alaska when it crashed into Mount Gannett, killing all 52 people on board. The crash happened in some extreme Alaskan weather. The weather was so extreme and dangerous that the rescue attempts had to be postponed by 3 days, effectively killing any chance anybody had at survival if they did manage to survive the initial impact of the crash. After the weather subsided enough for search parties and rescue teams to go out looking, they were able to find some of the wreckage sticking out of the snow close to the summit of the mountain. This was only the tail section of the plane though, and they couldn't locate the rest of it. It was believed that the plane was going at full speed, couldn't see based on the horrible weather conditions, and crashed directly into the top of the mountain. This exploded the airplane and meant that debris was scattered all over the mountain. The families of those who were lost were told that they wouldn't be able to recover their loved ones' remains and that they would have to perform a funeral without the actual body. This remained the case until in 2012 when they started to find more debris. A helicopter was flying over the area when they spotted a yellow rescue raft. They checked it out and they found a bunch more of the remains of the airplane. This was roughly 14 miles away from where they thought the plane had initially crashed, so they think that it floated down a river and then froze where they found it. The remains of 17 dead were found frozen in the ice, which I can only imagine was an incredibly morbid and unsettling sight. What is potentially even more scary is that the current count of identified bodies recovered is 40, which means that there are still 12 other bodies frozen somewhere in Alaska that have yet to be found. Number 4 on this list is a reindeer carcass. Now, a reindeer doesn't sound too scary. In fact, reindeer are quite beautiful creatures that are generally loved. The reindeer that was found in the ice, though, was carrying something extremely deadly. Anthrax is defined by Google as a serious bacterial disease of sheep and cattle, causing acute and often fatal septicemia and also transmissible to humans. Anthrax is so deadly that it's even been weaponized before and used to attack humans. The reindeer that was in the ice was carrying this disease, and when it thawed out the disease that had been dormant for decades, carried on right where it left off. This happened in Siberia and has caused quite a problem for the locals in the area. There are a lot of reindeer farmers out in that area, and what happened is that the disease found its way back into the livestock. Thousands of reindeer became infected, and this eventually moved into the humans. Many people got extremely ill and some even died. The scariest part about all of this is that we never even went looking for this reindeer in the first place. It was actually the cause of global warming. The rising temperatures are what are responsible for the de-thawing process of this reindeer and the catalyst for this outbreak. That's a big problem because it's thought that in the area of Siberia there could be thousands more reindeer in the exact same situation as the carcass that started all of this. Reindeer that have died to anthrax were then frozen and have lay in the ice for decades. These are frozen, ticking time bombs just waiting to thaw out enough and have the bacteria become active again to infect other living organisms. If the people in that area aren't careful, then a massive outbreak could spread, killing potentially thousands.
Coming in at 3, Meteorite. Recently in eastern Antarctica, a team from Japan and Belgium discovered a meteorite from Mars. This can be important for our life, considering meteorites carry clues about where they came from and are typically millions of years old. They hold information that we can't possibly learn from our location on Earth, which means we often rely on these giant rocks to bring us answers. More interesting still, a meteorite will have traveled more than 1.6 million kilometers by the time it hits the surface of Antarctica. That's quite the journey, but it's not over. Following the discovery, the meteorite was sent to the Smithsonian Institution Meteorite Library, and from there it will continue to travel, be broken up into smaller fragments for scientists across the globe to examine. Next up at number 2, the pyramid. Yes, you heard me correctly. A pyramid was found in Antarctica. Yes, it's puzzling to hear and shocked many around the world, not just you and me. But let's explore the issue a little closer before beginning to argue the point. Nicknamed the pyramid, this formation is actually a mountain that just happens to look like a pyramid. It was first discovered during a 1910 to 1913 expedition and was surprisingly kept secret. Fast forward 100 years later, with the growth of technology, Google Maps captured this picture of a formation. A geologist at German Research Center stated, "By definition, it is a nunatak, which is simply a peak of rock sticking out above a glacier or an ice sheet. This one has the shape of a pyramid, but that doesn't make it a human construction. It is not uncommon to find mountains with the peak of a pyramid. However, they are most common in glaciated areas areas, this just happens to be one of them. And lastly, in at number 1, mountain lakes. Did you guys know that underneath the thick ice of Antarctica's surface there are fully flowing mountain lakes? Scientists first made this breakthrough in 1970 with the help of eco-sounding, technology very similar to radars to locate planes in the sky. There is estimated to be 400 lakes under the 3 kilometers of ice, which is insane. Not only that, but this is just an approximation. Scientists believe there could be twice as many underneath the unexamined regions. It is believed that these lakes were formed during the separation of the supercontinent, which saw Antarctica break away from Gondwanaland. More interesting still, it may not just be the lakes underneath the surface. There is a theory that underneath the ice of Antarctica lies the lost city of Atlantis. Yep, believe it or not, way back when, Antarctica was as warm as Los Angeles, which means that its climate would have been hospitable for humans. It's entirely plausible that before the Ice Age hit, a society could have existed. Whether it was the lost city of Atlantis, well, it's unlikely, but there had to have been something, right?
Number 5. Deception Island. There's a place in Antarctica called Deception Island, which does not even remotely sound like a place I would have any interest in visiting, because it sounds kinda evil, haunted, or at the very least intentionally misleading. Deception Island was once used as a whaling operation in the early 19th century, where whales were brought in to be harvested and processed, and as such, it's littered with the remains of the mighty creature's bones and carcasses. Unfortunately, in the early 19th century, Avatar: The Way of Water hadn't yet been released, so none of the whalers knew that whaling was bad and they kept doing it. Maybe it's just the name, or maybe it's the reputation as an abandoned whaling station littered with macabre souvenirs of Earth's biggest mammal, but there have been all sorts of stories and rumors about Deception Island, that something or someone is still living there. Perhaps it's the spirit of the whales themselves. The whaling station was abandoned during the Great Depression and eventually found a new life, being repurposed as a British base during the Second World War. The station still stands alongside the vats where the whale fat was once burned, but it's all rusted over and lost to time. Recently, a paranormal investigation crew made the cold trek out to Deception Island to check out what the hubbub was about and experienced all manner of suspicious activity. The crew noted that when they visited the island, immediately they could see light orbs all around them and see strange shadowy apparitions, and reported hearing strange voices speaking to them, but in a language that nobody could make out. It didn't sound like any modern language. Now, in some cultures, whales are considered very important animals, even some cultures considering them as sacred. Who is to say that a ghost could only manifest as human? And there's been reported stories of animal ghosts before, and considering how much suffering there must have been there and how profoundly emotional whales are, it does seem possible that the spirits of the whales are still calling out there to this day. And if you're looking for more scary urban legends, cryptids, aliens, and just about everything else freaky under the sun, baby, look no further. Top 5 Scary's got all you're looking for and then some. Take a click through, subscribe, and enjoy. Number 4. The Ghost Ship. Speaking of non-humanoid entities, let's talk about one of my absolute favorite dinner conversation topics: ghost ships. Back in the era of exploration, the South Pole was a treacherous pass, and countless explorers would sail their last expedition around the Antarctic. One such ship would be a schooner, the Jenny. Not much is known about the Jenny, the purpose of its original mission, or who was sailing on it. What we know of the Jenny mostly comes from when it was found, when it was discovered by a whaling ship in the year 1860. The whaling ship, the Hope, was sailing through when the spotter saw a battered, beaten, but somehow still sailing schooner passing narrowly through the gap between two icebergs. The crew of the Hope closed on in, looking to make contact, recognizing the English flag atop the mast, and assuming the ship was in grave danger. They sailed forward. There appeared to be 7 men standing on the deck, although they looked gravely underdressed for the weather. It wasn't until the Hope sailed close enough that the crew realized the men they were looking at on the Jenny weren't the crew, but nothing more than frozen remains. The men had been flash frozen solid, as if it had happened in an instant. They appeared to be in mostly good condition, not really showing signs of decomposition or anything. The Hope's captain, one Captain Brighton, boarded the Jenny to try and understand just what had happened. He went underneath the docks and found a man slumped over sitting on a barrel, a journal in his hands. Brighton went up to wake him, but immediately realized, like all of the others, he was frozen completely solid in place. He pried the journal out of his hands to read the last entry. May 4th. 1823. No food for 71 days. I am the last one still alive. If this log was to be believed, then that would mean the crew had been sailing as corpses aimlessly for decades, preserved as if not a day had passed. A real-life ghost ship. Captain Brighton took the journal with him to return it back home. Tragically, the wife of the Jenny's captain was found dead in the bedroom cabin alongside their dog. The Hope sailed off with nothing more than the journal in hand and left the Jenny idly floating across the frozen water, where she still may be to this day. Or perhaps she's plunged deep beneath the icy water. Hopefully those men got to find some peace. And oh man, I hope they found some food wherever they are.
Number 3 on this list are the Children of Yulu Leo. This is a truly horrible story, so fair warning. 3 Inca children's bodies were found in 1999 by Johann Reinhardt and his team of archaeologists. These children were found on the summit of Yulu Leo, which is a mountain on the Argentinian and Chilean border. They were found in a box that was buried underground at the summit of the mountain, and their bodies were basically perfectly preserved. It's believed that this preservation is due to the cold temperatures at the summit of this mountain. Now, it's thought that these children died in the form of a sacrifice. The Inca civilization reached its height in 1530 and then slowly started to decline from the attacks of the Spaniards. The Inca civilization believed heavily in sacrificial rituals as a means of praising their gods. They would often perform sacrifices to commemorate important events or when they were going through harsh times to appease these gods. These sacrifices weren't limited to just adults though. Children were also used when worshipping the gods. Throughout the years, people have found other sacrificial sites and bodies that are presumed to be the work of the Incas. However, no bodies are quite as well preserved as the 3 children found in 1999. Honestly, really sad and scary stuff. Number 2 on this list is White Friday. White Friday was an event that transpired during the First World War on the Italian front. It happened on December 13th in 1916, which is actually surprisingly a Wednesday, but they decided to call it White Friday anyways. What it was a collection of disastrous avalanches that claimed the lives of thousands of soldiers. These avalanches happened all over the front, with the largest one striking the Austro-Hungarian barracks on Mount Marmolanda. That singular avalanche is said to have claimed the lives of 270 soldiers, burying them under meters of snow in the Alps. Due to the nature of these avalanches and just how widespread they were, bodies are still being discovered to this day. With over 2,000 people reported dying and being spread out all over the Alps, it's no wonder that these soldiers are still popping up. It is extremely eerie to find a dead body preserved in ice, but I think it makes it even worse when those bodies are from such a horrible time like World War I. If you happen to be traversing the Alps in the area that these avalanches took place, then for starters, be careful of avalanches, but also keep your eyes out for the remains of World War I soldiers. It's not extremely unlikely to stumble upon them. Number 1 on this list is the Iceman. The Iceman is, as you'd expect, a man. A Stone Age warrior that we've named Otzi. This man was found frozen in the Italian Alps near Austria in 1991. The discovery got worldwide attention when it was first released. This man was estimated to have been frozen 5,300 years ago, so it was a very groundbreaking find when it happened. Very quickly though, rumors of a curse started to circulate. People started to fear that the Iceman was actually angry to have been woken from his 53-century slumber and would have preferred to remain undisturbed in the ice. These rumors didn't just come out of thin air though, they all started with a death. Helmut Simon, the German tourist who discovered the Iceman to begin with, fell to his death whilst he was climbing near the discovery spot due to an avalanche. Then, as his funeral was taking place, Dieter Warneck, the head of the rescue team, died of a heart attack. A few months later, the archaeologist who first inspected the Iceman died as well. Then it was the head of the forensic team who died in a car crash when he was on his way to make a lecture about the Iceman. Then a mountaineer who played a critical role in taking the body out of its frozen location died in another avalanche. Then the journalist who was the one filming the extraction process of the Iceman died as well. And finally, a 7th person, a scientist who was associated with the studies performed on the Iceman, died to natural causes. Now all of these deaths happened within a year of the Iceman's discovery, and all of these people who died were crucial in the Iceman being found in the first place. Some people have chalked it up to a simple coincidence, but a lot of people believe that this ancient man is cursed, that his body and soul wanted to remain in that ice, and the second that it was taken out, the curse was released on those close enough to be effective.